want to be wanted, but not needed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I want to prepare my kids to succeed in life without me, that they could succeed in life on their own, without a loan, without dad's help, without assistance. If God forbid something happened to me, they'd be fine. So I want to prepare them for life that way. But I want to be wanted. What I'd really like is they don't need me anymore, but they choose to have me around because I'm fun to hang out with, because I did good memories, because they love me, because they appreciate what's there. So that becomes one of those mantras, to be wanted but not needed.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad podcast. Today, I am very excited to have a conversation with Aaron Amuchastegui. He and I, as with a bunch of other people I've talked to on here, are part of GoBundance. I really enjoyed, as a guy who just recently started homeschooling, I loved reading his wife and his wife's book, a 5-hour school week. It was awesome. Highly recommend it to everybody. But I want you to go ahead, Aaron, if you can, introduce yourself, your businesses, your family, the whole 9 yards, and we'll start with that.
Hey, man. Glad to be back on here. Yes, my name's Aaron Amuchastegui. You nailed that. We got to meet at a GoBundance event in Colorado, probably 3 or 4 years ago. Were you doing the podcast at that time? How long have you been doing the business?
No, I just started it about 5 months ago. Yeah. Cool.
So this is the new thing. I was going to say I did not know about it back then as one of the things that you were working on. So I've been a dad for 16 years. Man, I've got 4 kids. The Maddie, Charlotte, Isabel, and Brax. Actually my 16-year-old daughter is in the room next to me. We're at my office, and she is making stickers from, she had like 45 orders for Black Friday for her sticker business. We've had quite the interesting battle with her over the last couple of years. I mean, I've been a parent for a long time. I've got to see all sorts of different trials and tribulations through that. And all while, when I first became a parent, I was working for somebody else. And then I went broke when the housing market crashed. And then I became an entrepreneur when my second baby was born. I remember staring at her in the NICU with the oxygen mask. And it was this moment of I need to quit my job and go start my own business and take it in my hands. So business dad, there were so many parts about being a dad that became my entrepreneur journey. And then, of growth. So I live in Austin, Texas. I invest in, I have a bunch of real estate companies and software companies that are related to real estate. Real estate's been that thing that helped me do some of the others. And, and we'll see where this goes today. But, when my daughter got sick a couple years ago and she needed this kind of crazy treatment that insurance didn't cover, it was this moment of you go oh, this is why I was an entrepreneur. This is why I built wealth. This is why I ran my own businesses. And at the same time, being grateful that it didn't happen 7 years ago or 12 years ago, or any of those other times when I was at zero at the bottom dip of my entrepreneur journey. So man, I'm just excited to hear and talk about whatever you want to talk about today. I've seen it all, but as far as my life and my business, those have been pretty intertwined.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing I didn't warn you beforehand is my kids tend to come in and visit on these podcasts, so be ready for that. So if your daughter comes in and has questions, bring her on. We can ask her some questions too. We'd love to have some input from her if she wants to answer.
When I recorded the house, my son Brax has been on probably 30 episodes of the Real Estate Rockstars, and never wearing a shirt. He's always coming in asking me to buy an app or fix his Oculus or something like that, and he's always saying hi to people. So I'm sure if they come on, we'll say hi.
To me, that's one of the benefits of working from home is I get to actually see my kids. And when I was in the military, I didn't actually get to see my kids very often. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to work from home and see them. And it can be distracting sometimes, but man, I love it. But let me rewind a little bit just to kind of get some history on you. If you can, tell me a little bit about who was Aaron growing up? Who were your parents? What was it like growing up with your mom and dad, and what kind of life you were living, that type of thing?
Yeah, man. I grew up at a really interesting time. I got to see a whole bunch of different sides. My dad was an entrepreneur home builder, and my mom was an education worker. So she was a teacher, then eventually she became a vice principal and then a principal. and worked all the way up to assistant superintendent and superintendent. So she did the traditional career path of like getting a job and staying in it. And over 30 or 40 years of working in a school district, she promoted to the top of it to become the superintendent. So she had a very stable, steady deal with benefits all the way through. And then my dad was an entrepreneur. And so from that, we saw he would build custom houses, custom homes, hospitals, things like that. And he only built the really, really nice stuff. So when the economy was great, he would be building these multi-million-dollar custom houses, and he did really, really well. And then when the economy wasn't, his income would go to zero. We'd see these really, really kind of big swings. You know, he taught me a lot about entrepreneurship. He taught me a lot about grit. I could tell, you know, I got to grow up and find a lot of things later. The lessons he was trying to teach me that didn't make sense when I was a kid that made sense when I became a dad or when I became an adult. But I remember, you know, years, all of a sudden it was like we were doing really, really well. We were among the wealthy in town. And then a couple of years later, you know, the spotted owl shut down, you know, lumber in our town. Interest rates went through the roof and people stopped building. And my dad became a door-to-door salesman selling fireplaces, you know. And so he went from making 6 figures a year, which back then seemed like $500,000 a year today, to nothing, right? And became and selling fireplaces door to door. And that kind of lined up with some of my own experience, you know. So I had a good upbringing, right? Like I was among the more lucky people with that. I had plenty of complaints and plenty of things that I thought were unfair and all that gist. But when I look back at like the odds of where I was born and who I was born to and having supportive parents, you know, I had all these lessons as a kid where, my dad picked me out a little bit different than my siblings. So we'd get snow days, right? So there's so much snow that would fall, they would cancel school. And so when it was snowing, we would be like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for that to happen. We get a snow day, and what do people expect? People expect on a snow day that now we're going to put on our snowsuits and we're going to go sledding all day. And so my siblings get on their snowsuits, go start sledding. My neighbors would go start sledding. And my dad would say, okay, I need you to go shovel the driveway and shovel the roof. And I'm going to pay you to do it. And I'm like, I don't care if you pay me to do it. I don't want to do it. I want to be out with my friends. He's like, no, that's okay. You're going to be shoveling the roof. You're going to be doing the hard work first before you get to go play. And there were a lot of examples like that as a kid. And then like during the summers, you know, he was kind of a failed developer at the time when he had this hillside that we owned and were maintaining, and summer would hit and the weeds were, you know, it's like 20 acres of property where the weeds were 6 feet tall. And he's like, here's a weed eater. And you just go weed eat those fields now. I'm like, why isn't Jenny doing it? Why isn't it Matt doing it? Why can't you have anybody? Hey, I'm going to pay you. I don't care if you're going to pay me. I don't want to do it. And again, that's like I spent my summers doing that. While friends were driving, you know, riding by on bikes, doing fun stuff. And man, I tell you what, I felt like it was super, super unfair when I was a kid, but that grit and that work ethic and everything else sure helped me become who I was and who I am. And I give like so much of the credit of my success to things like that, you know. And fast forward to, you know, from 2009 to 2012, I had a really good run. I built a business. I made a bunch of money during that time. And then 2013, I lost it all, right? For, you know, maybe we'll get into the story, maybe not. But I went from making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to zero, to being in debt, and then going to like applying to be an Uber driver. Go to apply to get a job at like the city of Napa as a building inspector. And it reminds me of my dad going from like running his businesses to selling fireplaces door to door. And like, you just do whatever it takes. And I've had a bunch of times in my life, I had to go, like 1 week, my life was great. It was amazing. And the next week I had to go back to doing manual labor. I had to go back to switching back and forth. So he led by example with that. And then by putting a lot of kind of work ethic and stuff into me, I knew what it was like to do hard work. I knew what it was like to do hard work for days on end when you didn't want to do it, and having to like teach yourself how to like to zone out and not think about it and things like that. So I had a lucky life. It was also really lucky to have one parent that was an entrepreneur and one that wasn't, to get to see kind of both sides of that journey and see, you know, which way you want it. And I think for them, it was a great combination, because when his business was down, you know, her income and everything helped support everything. I think a lot of entrepreneurs now tend to go straight to, you know, one works and the other's a stay at home type thing. And there's pros and cons to that. We've had times in our journey when that was a really positive way to do it, but there's no right or wrong way to do this thing. But I learned a bunch from my dad, and then as a fast forward, just while we're on topic of him, man, like any relationship, love-hate relationship again, because he put higher standards on me, higher expectations on me. It helped me with the skills that I needed. He died in 2014, 2015, way too young, pretty suddenly. Died suddenly at 64 years old. So he wasn't super young, but like most people are living way past that. My grandparents, his parents were still alive when he died, So my dad passed away at 64 years old, and he hadn't retired yet. Like for years, he kept saying he was going to, but he kept having one more person say like, hey, can you build this house for me? He said, all right, if I can make another $50,000 from this, I'll do this, and then I'll retire. I'll do this, and then I'll retire. Now, part of it was he liked it, but the other side is he really wanted to go do other stuff with his life. He wanted to go, like he had booked like a 3-month vacation in Hawaii. There was all these things he was going to do, and he didn't get to do it. Like 3 weeks after he died was like when he was supposed to start that 3-month vacation. So he was a business owner, but he wasn't really a long-term investor, where when he didn't go to work, the company didn't make any money anymore. So I learned a lot about that during that time. And then I learned about, I remember coming out of that thinking life is short. Yeah. I had met him, and he had a bunch of regrets. When he was dying, he had a bunch of regrets. And then I heard David Osborne on a podcast with Matt Aitchison. And he said Matt said hey, David, what are your biggest regrets if you died tomorrow? And David's like, I don't think I would have any. I've had a pretty good run. I've done this and this and this. I've done this and this and this. And man, I would like having two totally different perceptions of my dad passing away, being like, with so much regret and stuff he wished he would have done. And another guy that said, who was younger than that said, if I died tomorrow, I'd say I had a pretty good run. And I said, I want to have that story. I want to have that pretty good run. That was when we pulled our kids out of school. That's when we started traveling the world. That's when we started saying, hey, instead of having bucket lists for later, let's see if we can make them happen now, because tomorrow isn't promised. And then when COVID hit, we saw that too, kind of. It was like this idea of, man, I'm so glad that we went to 15 countries the year before.
Yeah, no
right, or the years prior, because then we had a year or two where we couldn't travel at all. So yeah, so he taught me about good hard work, and then through dying in his journey there, he taught me about living life to the fullest and trying to not die with regrets, and that tomorrow is never promised. You never know when one day you're going to go. One day you'll be speaking, and the next day you're going to go into a coma. Yeah, and so that affects how you should act in your life.
Yeah, there's a ton I can pull out just from that. If for those who are listening back to back, there's now 2 episodes in a row where somebody passed away, and then it changed the trajectory of the person's life. Like yours was your father. I talked to Litin Yahav, another GoBundance guy, and that's how he ended up living in Israel. Was one of his dad's friends passed away, and they said, "Dude, like this could be me at any point. Like, why are we sitting? Like, let's go travel the world." But my father-in-law, right around the same time as your dad, it was January of 2016, he passed away. Fell downstairs at work. I was deployed to Africa at the time. Got a phone call, said, "Hey, you need to come home." He was still alive, but made it back. And that was one of those like smack in the face moments. Like, I just lost one of my dads, like I was there to be with my wife, but I couldn't imagine. That was another pivot point for me. Just like, I don't think I've ever told you this story, Aaron, but I was stationed in Japan, and my son came running up to me. I was taking the trash out. I was traveling all the time. The military had me going everywhere all the time. And my son came running up to me, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, don't leave again." And I was just taking the trash out. So, and that was like a year and a half or 2 years after we had lost my father-in-law. And it was like just a smack in the face and then a smack in the face. It's like, I need to change my life. I can't live off the government telling me what I need to do, where I need to go, how I need to do things. I'd already had a couple hundred doors of apartment buildings, and it was time. That was where the path changed for me, and I needed to start making some changes. But I don't know where I'm going with this, other than don't don't let, if anybody's listening, don't let a death in the family, don't let a tragic situation be the thing that makes you change the trajectory of your life. Change the trajectory of your life now because you're learning from other people that had to go through it. So,
yeah.
But no, I want to rewind again a little bit more to go back. So how did your dad get into entrepreneurship and building houses? Was that something that he got from his dad, or where did that come from?
So he didn't. So he got it from his stepdad. So my dad's story was much different because he grew up in, broken homes, halfway on the streets, seeing, lots of drug use, lots of craziness. And he didn't come with much, and then his first parents, got divorced. And then later his mom married someone new who was an entrepreneur. And so maybe when he was like, I think 14, 15 years old, he got this new kind of father figure in his life that became the stepdad, was an entrepreneur, was a real estate developer, kind of encouraged him to go do things, but didn't pay for it, right? Encouraged him to do things. And then my dad became a father when he was really young, became a father at 16, right? So he's in high school, becomes a father at 16. And then essentially it's like barely being able to graduate from high school. First, he has a job going, trying to support his new family. Now, it was at a very different time, like in the 70s, right? But still. And then, so he learned kind of hard work to kind of get him out of these crazy situations. And then, he put himself through school, got like but at that time it was like a 2-year associate's degree in like construction, something like that at the local technical school. And then just started trying to become a builder, developer, work for someone else first. And I think, the economy in 2009 is kind of what forced me in from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. And I think it was probably similar for him in the 80s. Like he saw that example, but then also when he first got his degree, he was working for other people. But then in the 80s, when all of a sudden it was like, all right, development stopping, selling stuff door to door. I think that's truly when he probably became that entrepreneur. So he used it as a way to like make his life better than it was ever going to be before, and to get himself out of a hole. And when people said, he won't ever be anything, whereas when I grew up, people were like, it was almost the reverse. Like I was voted most likely to succeed. And I had this reverse pressure of like almost too much expectation and like, oh, Aaron's going to be amazing. Just look at him. Or my dad had the opposite, where people would see him and be like, he's going to be a loser forever. And then he was able to, so he had, like using that chip on his shoulder, he was able to use that for his drive to succeed. Kind of funny, I think, how through generations, sometimes the opposite stuff happens.
Yeah.
Right? Like
very much so.
Yeah, he was the guy getting in so much trouble and smoking on the bridge and doing drugs and a parent at 16. Like he was the poster of like all the commercials of like, don't turn out like this. And then he was able to still rebuild and create a great life for himself. And I was kind of the opposite. And then, but the pressure of like, hey, Aaron's going to do great almost made me screw around more than I was supposed to.
Where do you think he got the drive to turn that around and say, I'm not going to be the guy that you guys are saying I'm going to be? Like, what do you think that came from?
It could have been parenting. He also, he lost his best friend when he was 17 years old. His best friend like drowned in front of him. And and who knows, right? If that, when we talk about just our other stories right now, like I think there was probably some of that where you start to go like live life to the fullest. It was him and not me. Like I need to honor that memory some way. But yeah, I think he probably had several turning points that pushed him for drive. And then luckily he was just a naturally smart, hardworking guy, that was able to kind of overcome. Cause that's abnormal, right? When nobody believes in you, it is so much harder to overcome, I think.
For sure. Yeah. Because the words that we say, the things that we do as dads, we obviously know that the words we tell our kids have a lot of power that gets put in their brain, and whatever it is, we can make or break our kids' brain, and so can anybody else that's trying to influence them. So, When you were growing up, did you have much involvement in the custom home building stuff? Were you involved in understanding what the business was like or how it all worked?
Yeah, I got to see a lot of it. It started with weed eating the lots and then doing cleanup on the job sites. And then even, as part of when I first went to school, it was for architecture, because I was doing AutoCAD drafting through high school on projects that he was building and things like that. So I grew up in it. I got to see all sorts of it. And I also remember always just being like, Dad, you should do business like this instead of like this. You should do business like this. And so it reminds me of new employees that'll come in and say, hey, you should change this in your business and change this in your business. And I remember him going no, I've tried that. And the reason I do it this way is because of this. And I kept thinking I knew so much more than him. And frankly, no, you learn later. It just takes time to learn those lessons. So I got to grow up in the business, learning all sorts of stuff, seeing kind of the pros and the cons of it. I mean, I loved it when things would turn out good and he could drive by things and say, I built that. I thought that was so cool. When you go around town and you go he built that theater and he built that hospital and he built this. And even when he passed away, that was one of the things we'd go look around. You'd see his signature was all over town. My brother actually lives in a house that my dad built for somebody else. It's gone through 4 owners, and my brother just bought the house 2 weeks ago. So he lives in a house my dad built 40 years ago.
That's really cool. Where'd you grow up?
Klamath Falls, Oregon. So Southern Oregon.
Oregon. All right. Very good.
Small town up there.
Yeah. All right. So when you said you went into college to do doing all the technical side of the house, how did you go right into that sort of a job? Did you work for your dad for a little while? Did you find somewhere else? Where'd you go after college?
So it's a bit of a screw off in college too, right? So I got up to, it was 4.0 student in high school, but I didn't really learn how to meet people because I graduated from high school with 30 people that I went to preschool with, So I was always known and popular. One of the things I struggled with when I got off to college was people didn't know me. I had to learn how to be social. I had to learn how to re-meet people. And it was a struggle. It was hard for me. These started getting into a lot of drugs when I was there too. So I still did great that first year. Came back that summer and I would do AutoCAD drafting for him, during the summer. And then it started to party so much that kind of by the next year, I was I'm not going to go back to school. I'm making enough money now doing AutoCAD drafting. I'm going to say $40 an hour or something then. It was when I get a degree, it's not going to be much better. But during that time too, I started doing just way too many drugs, way too many things. I had I had a couple year detour where I had to go to prison for a couple years for just this major screw up. So then when I got out of there, and we'll see how far, there's plenty of podcasts that go into that story as we jump around. We'll see where we go with it. But, so 23, then I get out of prison in Southern California with a chip on my shoulder. I've done 2 years of school. And at that moment, I'm all right, now I need to make up for lost time. I just lost 2 years of my prime time of my life where I should have been doing, I should have been celebrating and doing fun stuff. And instead I'm here, doing this. So then I went back to school. That time it was Cal Poly San Luis Obispo into construction management. And when I went back as a student, when I was in my early 20s and I was paying for it myself and I had lost a couple years of my life, man, I did school way different. I paid attention. I wasn't trying to just get a grade to pass anymore. I was trying to learn something. I was I paid $300 to be in this classroom today. What am I going to learn today? It's going to be worth $300. And I'd be sitting hunting. What's the thing that I'm that was worth my time? And so then that was different. So then graduated at a time at the height of the housing boom. Because I was an older student, because I worked harder, because I actually cared, I won these 2 national championships in essentially home building development. I was the only person to win it twice, 2 years in a row on this big national championship. It's been going forever through the NHB for college students. So then when I graduated, I got heavily recruited. I got to work. I got to run a development as a director of operations for a home builder. Most of the time you started a project engineer level. I started way up in a company because of my experience with that, which was really, really cool. And for a couple years, man, it was amazing. I was just working at a construction company. We were golfing a couple days a week. As soon as we'd finish building the houses, they would sell. We could build a house in 50 days. Man, we were building widgets and it was fast and it was easy. And the housing market crashed. And the housing market crashed. So it's so right out of school, first it was in school, screwed up, got a 2-year detour, back to school, but worked so much harder this time. came out and got my dream job and got what I thought was like, oh my God, all right, I got a college degree. I'm making 6 figures. This is the dream. This is what life was supposed to be. Housing market crashes. And I got a call from our Sacramento office that said, hey, 2 things. We just laid off 70 out of 75 people today. You're one of the 5 people that are left. And if you can move from that time, we were living in Santa Barbara. And if you can move from Santa Barbara to Sacramento this weekend, you can keep your job and come work for us up in Sacramento. And it was like, what? Laid off. So I didn't know whether to say thank you or not. Right. Like, so, all right. So I'm one of the 5 people left. And if I move up there right now, and by that time I had 2 kids, I think, or maybe I had 1. I only had 1 actually. So moved up to Sacramento and went back from golfing a couple days a week to back to that manual labor. And we were doing all these bank workouts and short sales with developers, and went from running a big old office to putting, hammer and bags on and driving an hour and a half to try to do buyer repairs, to help these guys I was working with, like short sale their houses, and like get the stuff delivered. So it went from, that was a pretty big, quick change in our industry. And that was all within like 3 years of graduating. It was like graduating at the very top to all of a sudden like this rude awakening of like, oh, my degree doesn't mean anything. My experience doesn't mean anything. It's about grit and hard work again. It's about selling fireplaces again. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, that's. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I think that there's some real strong relevant stuff in there. You already mentioned that your daughter is running some business stuff, obviously after reading your book, I know that they're a little bit involved in some various things. So what have you been taking out of these business lessons, both that you learned when you were a kid and right now? How have you been kind of applying those with your kids? And what sort of communication do you have with your kids to be able to show them like, hey, these are the things, these are the ups and downs of what daddy does,
Yeah. The 5-Hour School Week was our book that really came out of a business lesson. Right. So one of the things when I had to rebuild my business in 2013, and that time I was like, all right, I've got a good business plan, but I can't afford to pay people. And how do I do a bunch of jobs at the same time? And I read the 4-Hour Work Week and the Miracle Morning. And I combined both those things into my life and how to do business and how to be really efficient and get stuff done in a short period of time. We talk about in our homeschool book, this story of we went on vacation for a couple weeks. It was like our first vacation, kind of needed to, and then didn't have any phone or internet while we were there. So I couldn't work. My daughter forgot her homework. And then we got back, and on the way back, I could just see how stressed she was getting about her homework. She was only 7, and school was stressful for her. Stressful. And she was a good student, but they put so much pressure on people. And so I remember us getting back to the house, and I was like, all right, well, we'll just see what we can get done. And we went through essentially 2 weeks of homework, and we sat down, we focused, and we did 4-hour work week style. And, she went through the stuff, and as soon as she had a question, I helped her. And after a few hours, we finished her 2 weeks worth of homework. And she was feeling so relieved, and she looked so relieved. She's like, I can't believe we did it. I'm like, I can't believe we did it either. Right. And she went to school. I remember picking her up the next day, and she's like, Dad, you'll never believe it. I'm the only one that knows long division. I'm the only one that got all the homework done. And she was gone for 2 weeks. And so those are like some business stuff that we started applying to like education and lessons. So there's some lessons that you need and some lessons that you don't, and it's not always super efficient. So to get the most out of life, it became this combination of like traveling plus learning stuff in school, but plus learning stuff somewhere else. Right. And in business, we have to learn stuff from all sorts of different places. Right. So in some stuff, there's a class, and some stuff there's experts, and some we just have to watch someone else do it. And some it's trial by fire. It's like trial and error, and so that's what life gets to really be about. So like, those are the lessons that we try to kind of push through in business and life. There were times when the kids would open the mail and they'd sort the mail. We'd find little jobs for them to be doing. I've had times where I was hoping one of them would take over my businesses someday. Sometimes that I don't. One of the unique, interesting things I've seen with my 16-year-old is she's really, really good at social media. Like, so there's some stuff that like, it's sad, but like, and I think I'm pretty good at social media, but she's great at it. Like, she generates sales. She makes big things happen on there. And those are stuff that are like self-taught through trial and error and through something that she was passionate about. And so I think as the kids look into what they're going to be doing, the finding stuff they're passionate about that they're going to like dig into, and then trying to find a way to monetize it. And we did all sorts of things to help them learn about monetizing stuff. I remember a couple years, I guess probably 4 or 5 years ago, when my daughters wanted to buy something. So she ran out and she like ran the lemonade stand for a little while. I remember her coming in and handing me the money and saying, transfer that to my account. So like she was like $8 short or something. And she said like, hey, here's $8, transfer that to my account. And then she ran to her room and ordered the things she wanted to order. Right. So she knew she could go work for it.
Yeah.
You know, and so my oldest had a pretty cool business running for a while. When we wrote the book, I think she had part of it going. And then she got really sick. And she got really sick to where she couldn't eat, she couldn't drink, she couldn't sleep, she couldn't wear socks and shoes. She was in a crazy amount of pain. It was horrific. It was horrible what she was going through. And I remember she shut down her business at that time. And some people weren't super understanding because she had to like cancel some orders and say like, hey, I'm not going to be able to send this order. She was really let down by her people, by her customers, by her followers, because they didn't understand. Their kids, they didn't understand.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm never going to run that business again. And then, 5-6 months ago, she goes into remission. She gets her life back. A couple months ago, she gets her car. And I say, cool, you just got to pay for gas. And she goes, what? I got to pay for gas. And so then she says, okay, I'm going to get a job. And she starts going and looking at jobs and applying for jobs because she's like, I'm not going to be an entrepreneur anymore. And she goes and looks to see what she was going to get paid at these jobs and started doing the math at what she was going to get paid at these jobs. And she goes, Dad, do you think you can go grab all my business stuff out of storage and put it up in your office? I think I'm ready to start my business again. And in the last 2 weeks of being back to open, she made $850 in Instagram deal or TikTok deals where people paid her to post TikToks about their products because she has such a big TikTok following. She's 16. And then she did 45 sticker sales or whatever yesterday for Black Friday, Cyber Monday type stuff. So she'll make, $1,200 in the last week. And she's like, yeah, that would have taken me 2-3 weeks at McDonald's or somewhere else. So, the being an entrepreneur is not stable, but you are in control of your destiny. And being an entrepreneur doesn't always work. You get the high highs and the low lows, and they've seen all sorts of that. I think they will be able to describe similar roller coasters to the way that I can, right? I go, my dad went from this and then he went to selling fireplaces. I think they're going to have similar stories about me of the times when it was easy and the times they could tell I was working hard and the time we were making a lot of money and the time we weren't. But they'll also see that like that although it doesn't work, that when it does, it pays off big time. Yeah. And Maddie was like trying to find her own way to pay off big time.
And obviously you do a lot of investing and whatnot. So when it pays off big time, do you have conversations about what you like, how deep into the financial side of the house do you go with them as far as like, hey, when we get these paid off big time, this is what we do for saving. This is what we do for donating. This is what we do for investing. What the kind of conversations do you have around that stuff?
Yeah, we do a really unique stuff. So we haven't gotten to investing yet with them, but there is a couple young gals online that I see them posting videos. I kind of share those over to them. Like, hey, check out this girl said she bought a house type thing. I mean, I think that they'll know where to ask when they're ready for that. Something unique that we started about a year ago. So the kids used to have an allowance of like $50 a month, right? And something that we started was we changed their allowance to $500 a month, but they pay for everything. Their socks, their shoes, their shampoo, they're getting their nails done, their clothes, everything. And we did that so they would start to see how much stuff costs. Yeah. So they would have to learn to budget. So essentially it's like if you're having a job and you're working salary, you've got to learn how to run through your budget. And man, it has been an amazing little project. And I tell you what, my youngest daughter has a ton of money. She figures out how to save. Whenever she's about to buy something, she asks me how much money she has in her account. And then she'll be like, oh, no, I'm not going to buy that right now. But the stuff she buys, she really loves and she's really proud of. And she will find ways that when the other girls are throwing their shampoo away, that she's going to go take 3 shampoo bottles and pour them into one rather than go. So even though she isn't essentially earning her allowance, right? Yeah. She's saving it as if she worked hard for it. My other two, my 16-year-old, my 14-year-old, man, they're like, can we get paid early? Because we're out of money again already. And there's something I really want to buy tomorrow. They're like, they're paycheck to paycheck. We're going to say like that on their experiences. And they will, they'll buy stuff quicker. They'll do, my 14-year-old, I try to explain to her every month, she's spending like $200 a month on Starbucks. She doesn't care. She's not going to cut it out. She loves doing it. That's like her thing. She knows that that's why she has less, but she's choosing. So I tell you what, if people have the financial ability to do so, I mean, really, frankly, you're paying for stuff for your kids anyway, usually, and doing it like this and making it be up to them. They're probably learning more about savings and budgeting than they ever could before. Now they do know that another thing that I've done in order to come up with that savings, so that every year, at the end of the year, they're on payroll, right? And I put them on payroll at the end of the year, and they are, and I don't have any, essentially don't have any withholdings for them. I don't know what the annual amount is this year, but it's like 12,000 or 13,000.
12,500 or
you can pay them
like that,
where they don't get taxed. So every year we do that. And I've got 4 kids. So every year, so when we started, it was like 12,000. They each got a check for 12,000. For them, it's not taxable. My company's expensed it. We even got audited once for it, and we showed that they were the pictures in all of our, sales ads for the 5-hour school week, and it was a no-brainer. Cool. All right, they're actors for your brand, no problem. By year 2, I had $96,000 in their joint savings account. We bought a house that today rents for $1,100 a month. Right.
Nice.
And we started that like 6 years ago. Bought another house 3 years later after those payments. So the $500 a month that actually goes into each of their accounts. So the rents from the houses and the rent and the money from their annual salaries goes into this joint savings account. And then every month they get their $500 a month that gets put into their accounts from that. That's really coming from those rentals. So they know that it comes from the savings. But someday we'll talk about how they save and like sort of invest. But the first 2 just need to learn how to save first. My youngest one, by the time she graduates from high school, she'll have enough money to do a down payment on a house or something.
So were you able to see early on, like the personality differences that you're now able to see with the finances? Like, there's that I don't remember what college it is, but that study about like the kids who were able to hold off on eating the marshmallow, they got, like they were more successful later on in life. Were you able to, obviously anecdotally, but see like in your kids early on, like, oh, this one's going to be a little bit more like this, that one's going to be more like that, now that they're growing up a little bit?
Honestly, we're kind of surprised by the reactions. And I think that before we did this experiment, we would have thought it was different. And this experiment's fairly new, right? Like a year ago. So maybe it's long. It's about a year ago. Like my oldest especially was the one that I thought was like super careful, but she also lost 2 years of her life for a little while. And she really, really likes concerts. And concerts are really, really expensive, when she went. And so she does. So I thought she was going to be the saver because she was the very careful one. She was the very conservative one. And she is not. She is so paycheck to paycheck, but then that's also why she earns extra money, but then she spends it as quick as she earns it. Now I do a lot of that. I do a lot of spending. I buy expensive stuff and expensive experiences. So there's nothing wrong with that either. So she's living paycheck to paycheck, but she's also earning more every month and spending even more than $500 a month. Yeah. I think my second kid, I probably did think that she was going to be like that. I think that because she just likes stuff. But the third kid, I'm actually very surprised how good she is at saving now. But now that we've seen it, it was like, I don't know if 10 years ago she would have done the marshmallow thing the right way and foregone gratification, but she sure does now. So I think the money experiment that we're doing, every parent should do, because I think it's the real world marshmallow one. And think about this. So like we started with Izzy when she was 10. So by the time she's 18, she's going to really understand the difference of savings or not and what it feels like when you save or not. And when she actually has to work for the money, it should be even more so like, whoa, I had to work for that money. And so we're really just hoping that with the other 2 that they'll learn the same sort of savings along the way. But it's been the best learning experience.
That's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is learning things like that. I mean, I've heard people talk about how they had their kid quote unquote buy the microwave and they rent the microwave out and do all sorts of different things. But I really like the concept. Somebody else told me that like, hey, next time you go to the grocery store, give your kid $100 and tell them that they need to go buy the things that they want for groceries with their $100. And then let them cash out and see how much it actually costs by the time they're done, And I love all of these different experiments to get them thinking differently about money, and how it actually gets spent and how it gets saved and how it gets built and like what going and selling lemonade on the corner, right? That makes a huge difference. And I'm going to ask some selfish questions. Hopefully somebody listening can get something out of it. But my kids are a bit younger. My oldest is in fourth grade now. We had that same experience that you were talking about with your daughter being like 7 years old and getting stressed over school. And my kid was the same way. It's one of the reasons I decided to do homeschooling this year, because I was looking at it going, my kid is working a 45-hour school week. Like, this is asinine. Like, when is he going to be a kid? Like, he's so stressed out. Like, I barely have time to take him to golf and do the things that he won't, like, to let him be a kid and play in the backyard. Like, I need to do something different. But I want to give a bunch of things that I never got to get, like education on money and finances and all this stuff. And you said something earlier, like, well, they'll ask the question when they're ready for it. And it made me kind of wonder, like, how much I'm throwing at them, and that is just a complete, like, waste of my time, or a miss, or something that I'm going to be pushing them away. How did you kind of decide when to bring something up natural, like just or forced, and when to wait until it naturally came? How did you kind of work through those situations?
When they're younger, there aren't too many things you can actually prep for ahead of time. So when you think about, like, if I understand your question right, it's like, when you're trying to teach them, is it worth teaching them before the situation comes up, or teaching them when the situation is happening? Right? Now, you could try to create moments, right? If there's lessons that you want to create, you want to teach them, you can create the moments. You can create the moments where they do the lemonade stand and then they go spend it right afterward, and then they don't, and then they go shopping and they don't have money for their toy. Or you can create the moments where you have to choose between one thing and another. Like, hey, do you want this? I'll give you $5 a week, and we'll go to the store every week. Right. And they say, oh, can I get that toy for 15? And you go, if you don't get a toy the next 3 weeks, right? So, like, you can create these experiments to teach whatever you want. But I tell you what, when I wanted to learn it, I learned a lot more. So you think back to the way that my daughter learned to read in my last one. By the time when we started homeschooling, we started as like unschoolers and said, you know what, they will learn. If they're learning something they want to learn, they're going to learn it faster and easier, and it's way more productive. And they said, well, what if your kid just wants to do math all the time? Well, they're going to do that, and they're going to do really, really good at it because they're liking to, but eventually they'll get bored of it and they'll want to learn something else. So one of the keys to, like, targeted learning is, if it's something they're focused on and they want to learn it and they're excited about it, they're going to learn so much faster. And you think about you or me. If we went into a class about health insurance right now and sat there for an hour, we could learn it, right? And we would take in some of it that was important, but we wouldn't take in all of it. And if we went into a class about accelerated depreciation and how we were going to, save $1 million on our taxes next year, we'd probably be paying a lot more attention, and we'd learn way, way more. We'd even be more alert. We wouldn't need the caffeine to stay awake. We would just be super pumped about what we were learning about. And so, like 7 or 8, my youngest daughter hadn't started reading yet. We hadn't really tried. We hadn't done any effort with that. Now, mind you, my first daughter, by the time she was 7, was reading like books for 5th and 6th graders. Right? But we were like, we're chill now. We're not going to force pressure on the kids at all anymore. And we are on a trip up in like Canada, this like garden area. And at all the gardens, there's like these plaques. And on the plaques, there's like descriptions of stuff that's going on. Right. And my other daughters are reading the descriptions because it's also a quiet place. We're not allowed to talk. We're walking through this like museum thing. So my older daughters are reading the descriptions on the plaques. And my youngest daughter is going, what does it say? What does it say, Dad? And she's whispering. And she decided in that moment, she wanted to read. Now, when she was like 5, we tried a little bit, some pushback, didn't want to. All right, she doesn't want to learn to read right now. We're not going to make her. So then she comes back from that trip and goes, I want to learn to read. And in about 10 days, she was a reader. Right? From the time she decided she wanted to become a reader and the time she started paying attention to the numbers, like her brain was different at that time and she wanted to do it. And it was like she had catching up to do. So 10 days from the time she decided she wanted to read, she pretty much taught herself how to read. And we're like, wow, so glad we didn't waste all that time before fighting with her, arguing with her about it. Would any of her teachers know today that she didn't learn how to read till she was 7 or 8? Nope. Nobody would know. Do you care? Do I care? When she's working, running a business or working for somebody when she's 30, are they going to say, when did you learn to read? Nobody's going to care. So those are some great examples of like No, it is way better to create a learning experience of one, when they want to learn it, and or two, when it's a life applicable thing. But you could force some of the lessons. You can have it. There were times too, like they would hear me talking about buying a house and they'd say, so what does it mean when you buy a house? Wait, when you're talking about loan payments, I remember the question, like, how does someone buy a house?
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, so then I'm explaining, you getting a loan and making a payment. And how's that work? And what happens if I don't make the payment? And like, then so in that conversation, they learned so much about it because they asked when they wanted, they were curious, and all of their questions were based on, they were surprised by the answers, right? So they learned so much. Now, if I would have just said, like, on a random day, hey guys, come here. I'm going to do a little lecture about how to buy a house, right? They would have learned some stuff, but not as much as when they were like really, really curious about it. And who knows why they were curious about that day and 7 others. I'd been talking about it every time they were in the car with me for the last like 3 or 4 years prior to that. One day they wanted to know how, and they thought that was pretty interesting. And so their questions were like, they were really paying attention. Does that answer your question the way that?
Yes, but I have no patience and they need to learn it. So guess what? I have no patience. They're learning it tomorrow. No, it does. It answers my question a lot. It's one of those that's, I'm still kind of figuring out the homeschool thing and how to teach my kids across the board anyways, right? Like when they were in school, my oldest anyways, when he was in school, it was difficult for me to try to teach him anything after school because I was like, you just spent 45 hours this week.
You're already tired,
learning. Like, what am I, like, your brain isn't ready for any of this, you know? My brain isn't ready for it because I've already spent, 8 hours this week doing homework on top of dealing with the stress that you've already had. So, so I'm still trying to figure out the homeschool thing too on what structure do I want to keep inside of these checklists. And I remember telling myself as I was doing all this research and I was looking at things and I read your book and I said, like, I want to just teach them things that they want to know. I want to at least start there. And then when I actually started doing it, I didn't. Like, I just, no, this is what week 1 is supposed to have, is these things. And I'm really trying to fight doing that. And it was a good reminder for me to and I'm fighting it now because I just asked you a question on how I get to bring things up to my kids. How do I force it into their mouth, instead of just waiting for them to tell me, and it's a tough balance.
Let me kind of address that for a second too. So a couple things. It's like reprogramming your whole self and trying to think about homeschooling like you did entrepreneurship. So 1, I would say it's not a race. 2, I would say just because someone else says they're supposed to learn this by a certain date or a certain age doesn't mean that they do. Right? Yeah. Again, Izzy learned to read when she was 8. Does it matter? No. And she actually goes to an Acton now. She goes to like Actons are kind of like a traditional school, right? And then the other idea of where it's like, so when you first get started, you're like, hey, just work for, the other way when we first got started, we used a website at the time called Time for Learning. There's lots of different ones out there. So there's the Khan Academy, things like that, self-guided stuff. And we said, here, you have to work for an hour on whatever you want. Here's your options. Here's some like art stuff, like coloring books and paints and things like that. Here's some math workbooks. Here's some like English stuff. And here's like a project where we're going to try to build a bridge. Right? You have to work for an hour on whichever one you want. And the computer. And the computer for like classes. And people would jump back and forth between them. And someday, we'd have times where for the 2 weeks, the kids just coloring. So they're doing for their hour. And you're like, oh my God, we're falling behind on everything else. But then eventually they get bored of that. And they go, okay, well, now I want to learn some math. Or they're going to be hanging out with a friend and that friend's going to go, what's 6 plus 6? And they're not going to know it. And they're gonna, just like when Izzy couldn't read and he's going to go, I want to learn math today. Like, I want to learn I want to know how to say that. I want to know how to do that. I want to be ahead. When my second daughter, she was the first to like go back into a couple of our kids are in Acton now and a couple of our kids homeschool. But when she was one that decided to go back into like an Acton, we really got tested because when she first got in there, she was behind on her math by like 3 years. She was ahead on her reading by a year. Right. And on her English and stuff like that, she was average. Right. But she had been out of school for 7 years. Right. So homeschooled for 7 years, doing that method of saying an hour a day, whatever they want to learn, but making sure that you give them the options of like your different topics and things like that. Because you also don't want to be, one of the reasons they hate school is they're like, the teacher's battling with me. Or one of the reasons we hate it as parents, we're battling them. No, do your homework. I don't want to do my homework at a bed. No, you do your homework. You do not want to be battling with them, right? Like a parent as a teacher forcing stuff, it becomes this battle, but a parent is like a friend guiding through the process. Hey, whatever it is. Long story short with Charlotte is cool. We're like, it's fine that you're a couple years behind. We don't care. We don't believe in grades and the other systems. Like, you just keep going. But one day she did. And she said, you know what? I want to go to a big school next year. I want to go to a really big school. So she applies to go to a really big school. She has to test. She takes a test. And in that test, she's like 2 years behind on the math. And she's bummed because she can't get into the school she wanted to go to. So she says, can you get me a tutor? And so then, okay. So then one day a week after school, she'd walk across the street and go to a tutor for an hour for math. And then after a few weeks, she said, can I go a second day a week? Again, I don't care if she gets all D's and she graduates. I don't care if she goes to high school or not. I don't care if she goes to college or not. It all gets to be hers. But like, she's learning so much more from that tutor because she's saying, can I go to a tutor to catch up on math? Because I want to test at a level that I can get into that other school. And so now a year later, she caught up on her 3 years of stuff. Now she's testing as high as anybody else. She had to learn how to test. She had to learn how to do all those things. But I don't think she would regret those, several years where she traveled instead. And and some of the other stuff too for learning, man. Like, if you went to a kids museum and played with your son for an hour that day, that counts, right? Like, if you did flashcards or whatever else, it is hard though. It is hard when you're trying to hit a curriculum and you're trying to think about in the back of your mind, well, if they go back to a normal school next year, we don't want to be behind.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want my kid to be behind is like the thing that parents say, dads say with everything, with throwing a baseball, with reading a book, with doing math. We're so worried about our kids being behind in something. And we need to remind ourselves as adults, like, we all catch up. Like,
but I'm also always worried about being behind too. And like, the group of guys that we're around, I'm like, am I behind? Am I not hitting the marks that I want to hit? So of course I pass that to my kids, and how that, like, that's an unneeded pressure for the kids. Yeah. You were about to say something though. What was that?
No, it's that same concept. Yeah. It's just that idea that, it all comes out in the wash eventually. And we think about like the stuff that the biggest things that we were worried about as kids didn't come true most of the time, at least for me. Yeah. So, yeah. So, it's hard, man. So yeah, my best recommendation is, as you're trying to do it, say like, hey, what do you want to learn today? I remember once it was like, we said, what do you want your project to be? Research project. And one said, do you want to research tigers? Another said they wanted to research, flying. And it was like, so that was their project for the next couple of weeks. Nice. One researched like a country. So it was like, they got to learn about tigers, whatever that was. They decided to say, this is something I want to learn about. And they have a lot more fun doing it. It's still the same process. School is supposed to teach you how to learn and teach you how to follow through with things.
But instead, it seems it actually is teaching people how to test and like follow instructions, and that's about it. It's rather annoying. How do you like the ACT in schools? I mean, I've heard nothing, for the most part, nothing but great things. I mean, there's a ton of abundance guys that do it. I've got one here semi-close that I've thought about going to, but we like to travel, and that's one of the other reasons that I like to pull the kids out. And like, it's always difficult to say, hey, I'm going to take my kid for 2 weeks. Before they report me to truancy or something. So how flexible are the Acton schools, and how have you been liking and how have your kids been liking that experience?
Yeah, and you always have to choose. I mean, when we pulled our kids out before, we were at a private school, and so we could do whatever, because they were like, you're paying to be there and they wanted you to pay to be there. And when you think about Acton's, just know that they're a franchise model ran by humans. So many of them that I've been to are amazing, and some of them that I've toured are not. Right. So when one person says they like the model and it works out really, really well, you go interview, and you're going to go look at one in your area, go make sure that you interview the people running it and see their philosophy, because there isn't strict guidelines. It's not a franchise like McDonald's, where when you go into every McDonald's, it's the same hamburger. Yeah. Right. It's a franchise where it's like the same concept, the same underlying things, but every quarter the guides say, hey, this is what we want to learn this time. what our kids learned this last time in like the last 2 weeks was, the last like 6 weeks was like playing musical instruments. And like, and their final was like, they recorded a 5-minute video of like some people playing drums, some people playing saxophone, some people playing piano, guitar, and some people singing. It was like a 5-minute presentation on a video. And some of that we were looking at, we're like, man, that was kind of a waste of 6 weeks. Like they didn't learn as much during that time. And I think the kids kind of felt like that too. So sometimes, but not every Acton is going to do that as a period. But there was one where they went and did presentations where for 6 weeks they had 3 different options to run businesses. One was like a shampoo company, an egg company, and something else. And I remember Charlotte calling these farms around here to see how much she could pay if she was going to get, organic eggs in bulk, how many they could deliver per week. And she was pricing, she wanted to have these eggs that she sold for a ton of money, like $10 for like 6 of them, because she got this really expensive wood packaging and like instead. So she had to run her own. And so some of the kids were like, we're buying our eggs for 10 cents. We're selling them for 20 and they're in this plastic wrapper. And she's like, I'm buying my eggs for 20. I'm putting a $5 box around them and I'm selling them for 10. And there's all these different versions of business plans. So we get that out of it. We're like, now that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
They have to learn how to work with each other because they get paired up with new partners each time. And sometimes they're like, that guy sucked. That guy took over. He didn't like any of my ideas. Like sometimes they're like, this guy on the team didn't even do their work. This person didn't do their fair share. And that's life and that's business and that's like teams.
For sure.
So that stuff is really, really cool. And then most of the reason that people like Acton's is there is no attendance requirement. We find more that our kids are like, they don't want to miss because if they miss too many days, they can't present at the final. Right. But it's not like they don't get a pass fail grade. So the one that we're at's really great. And like I said, I've heard lots of good stories about ones that are really, really great to do. They do have the flexibility and they do learn stuff. But also know that not all of them are the same. So if you're considering sending your kid to one, do your homework, talk to the other people that are out of there, ask them what like their last 4 or 5 sessions were, because they'll be able to know that like, oh, last year we did, one of our sessions was how to build a rocket. One of our sessions was how to sell eggs. One of our sessions was like this, to make sure that kind of lines up with what you like. Cause they end up redoing the same sessions every 3 years, with them in their rotation. But I love it. We loved it for a model of transitioning back for the ones that wanted essentially more time. When we first started homeschooling, their social life was fine because I was coaching soccer teams. They had all their friends. When we pulled them out of school, they already had 30 or 40 people in town they knew. When we moved to Texas and we didn't know anyone, it was a little harder to like build up new social stuff. And so it's like, it's tough to go to a new town and start homeschooling unless you're really trying to go help them find friends and teams and things. So the balance of Acton was like a pretty similar to the way that we like to do our business life and our education life. But now they get to hang out with kids too. So they get to meet other kids that are pretty like-minded families for the most part.
Mm-hmm. And of multiple ages, right? Because they're in like groups and not just like you're in, 6th grade and this is who you hang out with. So yeah, like the kindergartners to the 6th graders are all in the same room. So Brax had like my son who just got moved up into that. Like he was in this one called Sparks before, which is equivalent of preschool. And this year he went into elementary where he's the youngest and the littlest. In the preschool, he was the biggest and the most popular. And one of his first things he said, my partner didn't like my idea. He didn't use my idea and he took over the project. And so the whole presentation the first week was all the other guy. And Brax was really upset. And the other guy was new at it too. Like, and so he was essentially like, imagine a 12-year-old working with a 7-year-old and going and just naturally wanting to say like, so by the end of the year, they got to work that out. They'll have to figure out why it worked and why it didn't for both of them. But it's also just like real life stuff that happens. That's actually,
they're all in the same room, and so they get to learn from each other for sure.
Yeah, when I was looking at it, it was their first year. They were just opening up, and I was like, let me try to stick something I actually know and understand a little bit more before I go jumping into something that I have no idea I'm not even going to know if they do it well or not. So now that gives me definitely a lot more to go off of. But
Yeah.
So let's go into the businesses a little bit more. Tell me more about. Let's go a little bit more in depth. I mean, you've flipped like over 1,000 houses and done all sort like a bunch of different real estate transactions. So let's kind of go through what you're doing right now and how you got to why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So 2009 housing market crashed and went from making a bunch of money to not. And was trying business after business after business. And you go like, what are my skills that can be applied and used somewhere else? We were trying to buy foreclosures at the time that were on the MLS. We drive by them and go, this one just needs paint and concrete and they're selling it for $250,000. And last year, this was a $500,000 house. We should be able to fix it and sell it. We found out later the reason our offers were never getting accepted is because those listing agents were hand feeding them to like special people. Didn't matter how early, how high, anything. We just couldn't get an offer accepted. I discovered courthouse step foreclosures. The kind of invented an industry with that. When I went to my first auction, there was 2 or 3 other people bidding on 300 houses, and they were small time. And I remember first seeing that and going, wow, this can be huge. My first once in a lifetime opportunity. When this can be huge. And no one was doing it at scale. No one was doing it like running it like a home builder. And my dad was my first investor and had the first deal for free, and it worked out. And he told a buddy, that buddy told another buddy. People started asking me. I went and presented in front of a group, ended up raising a big fund and running my little house flipping company like a home builder. And we were the biggest buyers in Northern California and bought 1,000 houses on the courthouse steps over the next couple of years, delivered millions and millions of investor profit to people. Did really, really good. Blackstone came into that market in like 2012. Everybody's heard about, that kind of move now, 2012, 2013 to start buying houses for long-term holds. They told me they would put me out of business if I didn't join them. I didn't Google who Blackstone was. I was too young and too cocky. I didn't have a mastermind teaching me how to invest long-term or save or what to do. I tell everybody if I'd had GoBundance in 2010, I'd be a billionaire today because I was printing money and just wasting it because I was just a young, dumb kid that thought, he'd like was really, really special. So 2012, 2013, all of a sudden I'm broke. They put me out of business. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, hustling, doing construction work, applying to be an Uber driver, doing a flip here and there. I discover, I somehow ended up at an auction out in Texas to buy an apartment complex with the line of credit that the bank let me keep from my dad after he passed away because they felt bad for me. And apartment comes to bid, going once, going twice, sold. I don't bid on it. I'm scared. I hadn't been good at something in a couple of years. And I was like, what if I forgot? What if I'm getting something wrong? I can't afford to lose right now. I already lost it all. And I remember sitting there being all sad. And then another auctioneer shows up and starts selling houses and nobody's there. And I was like, this is like California 2009. There's no competition. There's nobody out here with skills and houses are selling hand over fist for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. I could not believe it. I flew out the next month and started buying. And I said, this time I'll be buying for long-term holds instead. Yeah. I remember thinking after I flipped 1,000 houses and went broke, like if I'd have just kept 100 houses, I'd have been set for life. So this time I said, I'm going to keep them. I'd buy 10 houses and I'd flip 1 or 2 to pay bills and get down payments. And I would keep the rest. Did that from 2015 to 2020. When 2020 hit, I had about 500 houses with different levels of investors and loans and things like that of people that owned them. I didn't own them outright. And some of my owned just me with loans. Some of them I owned outright. A lot of my owned with investors. And then the market, doubled and tripled. I remember thinking like, I'm going to go to Texas because prices will never go up out there. In 2017, I bought a software company that I was essentially buying the leads from. So I was buying the foreclosure leads from a company in Texas. I remember when I got put out of business in California and there were like 300 people at auction bidding on the same 3 houses. I thought the guy that's winning is the guy selling on the list. The guy that owns a company called Foreclosure Radar. And so when I got to Texas and I saw the other company, I had some forethought to say, you know what, I'm going to buy that company because someday there's going to be hundreds of people at auction. I'm not going to be able to beat them at auction anymore. And I'm going to be selling them the widget. I'm going to be selling them the picks and shovels. I'm going to be selling them the list. So my last couple of years, my shift has been I still buy real estate. I still own real estate. I have 800 houses. I've got a couple apartment complexes. I've got some developments that I've been working on, some big developments. But I've been focusing most of my efforts on my masterminds of trying to take people that are already flipping a lot of houses and like getting them to the next level. We call it my inner circle stuff. On my Real Estate Rockstars podcast, I've been focusing on. And our biggest push lately is this new software that I built for myself for many years. And we started selling it to other people 3 or 4 months ago called PropHawk. And that's been the most exciting thing, to take this product that's like we're using AI to go, here's 300 people that are likely to default in the next little while. Let's skip trace their phone number. Let's text them and call them inside the app. And within minutes, you're having conversations with people. And you're getting people to go, yeah, I need you to help me sell my house. Like within minutes, it's wild. It's like, and I think we're state of the art, industry leading technology. And we're updating it every day. Like, so right now I'm spending most of my days like building product, like testing out the product, making changes. Like, how can we make this a little bit better? So that was the journey of like, first it was buying and flipping houses, and then graduating to like flipping as many as I needed, but like long-term gratification of like holding as many as rentals as I could. Like my youngest daughter, like she'll buy the rental and keep the rent instead of, doing that now. And then expanding into other businesses. And it was like expanding into multifamily or expanding into storage units, and then into like the operating companies of owning the rentals, or the operating companies like the software companies and things like that. But my most exciting thing that I work on day to day is the software. Managing rentals isn't fun. My team does that. Yeah. And managing employees isn't necessarily fun. It's probably the most stressful, most difficult thing I do. You can't get anywhere. You can't grow something giant without them, but their well-being is in your hands, and it is a stressful balance. And because people are imperfect too. So yeah, that's what I'm working on today, and how I got here. I had a crazy journey. 2021 being in Texas felt like it was my second once in a lifetime opportunity. I learned the stuff that Blackstone taught me, and I bought a ton of houses. Yeah. I saw the market was changing, did really, really well. But I think real estate is an avenue for everybody. Right now it's a very different market, frankly. And so it's a lot different business plans that people will be following, and it won't be quite as easy as it was. But just like buying foreclosures on the courthouse steps, like it's a process that's very simple, but it's a lot of work. So not a lot of people do it. So, but I tell people, like, be grateful it's hard, because then you'll have less competition. So as the market gets tougher, you should have less competition.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, it's probably going to be, I don't know, 3-4 months before this episode actually gets released. I've got a backlog. So I'm curious, from the time that we talk to what happens in 4 months from now, where the market will be, what's going to be happening, and, how all of this kind of comes out. But it sounds like to me like there was one of the things we tend to do on, I did the same thing, going paycheck to paycheck, following my parents, just because that's what I saw them do. That's what I did. And it makes me wonder sometimes, recently I was listening to Cody Sanchez on a podcast, and she was talking about how, I don't remember who she was talking to. She was talking to some billionaire, had her over at the house, they were chatting. She said, the guy said, "Hey, do you think you're thinking small because you buy small businesses? Like you're so focused on small businesses, you haven't gone really big yet." And it's just because that's what she had built in her brain. And I did the same thing with finances. And I'm wondering if you would look at it and go, okay, well, you kind of repeated what your dad did. Not necessarily, like, in a way, because you didn't, and this isn't meant to be insulting, but you didn't learn the mistake that he did. You had to go and do it yourself to learn it, Yeah. And so these times that those happen, how are you relaying that information to your kids? Like, and I feel like this is almost a repeat of a previous question, but not quite, because it's like I want to make sure that my kids learn from my wisdom, not from their mistakes. Sometimes they're just going to have to learn from their mistakes, but I really want to do everything I can to help them learn from my wisdom and learn from my mistakes. Because I did not learn from my parents' mistakes. It took me getting married and seeing something different. And it took you falling on your face to realize, oh boy, that was a mistake, and I don't want to do that again. So how do we kind of prep our kids for that?
Dude, it's how do you prep anyone for that?
Yeah, no kidding.
Because it's really true. When you learn from someone else's mistakes instead of your own, it's true wisdom, right? Like that's where true wisdom actually comes from. Somebody that can learn from someone else. And frankly, and unfortunately, that's never been me. Mm-hmm. I've never been able to truly learn from other people until having to fall on my face enough times to then start learning. I remember thinking my dad's advice was horrible until I was in my 20s. And then it was like, oh yeah, he was giving me the right advice the whole time. Mm-hmm. And he was like forcing some lessons on me that I needed to learn, that in my 20s, I was glad I learned them, but I didn't think they were good until then. So I don't have the answer for that. I don't have the way that we go, this is how they can learn from our mistakes instead. What I do know is our kids, and what we've seen now, because my kids are getting older, is they pay way more attention to what we do and how we act than what we say.
Yeah.
So I don't do drugs. I don't drink alcohol. I do Ironman races. My kids have never seen me drunk, right? Not once.
Mm-hmm.
Like I haven't, like way before I had kids, they've seen me be super healthy. They've seen me eat healthy. They've seen me make good athletic decisions. They see me treat people kindly, right? So like I think the best way you're going to have them learn from like your mistakes is really just by how you carry yourself now, right? So like my mistake is I used to do drugs and I did drugs growing up, right? They know that. They know I've been to prison. They know I did drugs. They don't see any of that. What they see is I don't do it at all anymore. And I don't make exceptions to it. And even when someone else has a glass of wine, it's no big deal. I don't. So so there are certain lessons like that I hope they learn that way. I hope they learn because they go, hey, my dad's pretty cool and he doesn't do that. My dad's pretty successful and he doesn't do that. So even though I see my friends' parents drink wine, get drunk, it's okay. My dad doesn't. What's the difference? Like getting to see the difference. Oh, dad's up at 5 a.m. every day. Still dad's coaching soccer and running on the sidelines. So yeah, I wish there was a good answer to it.
So do you associate like family principles to that too, so that there's a little bit more tie? Because I mean, you're representing family principles without maybe with or without actually like having them written down and that type of stuff. Do you actually like write down those types of family principles so that there's a guidebook as well as a guide?
If both spouses are living the exact same way, then I think family principles works. I think most likely what happens is spouses live life slightly different. Mm-hmm. And so kids will actually get these real-time assessments for certain choices. This spouse works out, this one doesn't. How does it make them feel? This spouse drinks, this one doesn't. How does it make them feel? This spouse loves to read, this spouse doesn't. This one loves to like because there'll be things that they'll see that Kalina does that they're like, I want that. I wish dad did that more. And there are going to be things ideally they see me do. They go, I want what dad does. Because we like seeing it when that works. We don't like seeing it the other way. So I think it's a wide range of things like that. So now we do have a family theme song, right? That we had recorded with Brother James many years ago. It's on our YouTube page. It was professionally done. He came out and we wrote that with them. And that was this fun. I think that some of the lyrics like family, creatively, living this life together, humility, generosity, making memories that'll last forever. So like a lot of little things like that in there where we were like, this is what we do represent. Yeah. Like living life to the fullest. I remember going broke, going like, you couldn't take away my memories. Right. So they do know the experiences over things is like I will be wasteful on experiences because I mean, knock on wood. Cause I go, if I ever go broke again, that's the stuff they can't take away is those memories. Yeah. I think I'm probably not going to go broke a fourth time, but I went to zero 3 times. I went to zero 3 times and that was rough when I did. So we do have some family principles, but and I think and mantras work and writing stuff down works. Like, so it's a combination. If there's certain things you want to make sure your kid knows no matter what, then you have to live by them. And you have to tell them how you're living by them, and you're going to have to tell them why you're living by them, and then have those reminders when they're out. But if you say one of our principles is being honest, and they see you lie one time, then that's the pressure of being a parent. Yeah. If they see you lie one time, the principle's gone, and the principle's worthless, and dad's a liar. It's freaking crazy. I remember a moment when my dad when I'd start getting in trouble, and he said, Aaron, here's something you need to know about me. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, I actually got arrested for this. I got arrested for selling drugs. I was in jail for a few weeks, and then I got off on a technicality. And it was like, at that time, I just smoked pot like one time, and he found out. Mm-hmm. And he tells me that story. And I remember being so mad and feeling so lied to, and like feeling like, oh my God, he kept that secret from me for a long time. And he was like, and in his mind, he's like, it wasn't a secret. You never asked. It's like with my kids, I told them everything as soon as I could when they were super little. right? Super young, super little. Oh yeah, dad's been to jail.
Bedtime story about dad going to jail.
Bedtime story. Because when they're 3, they love you no matter what.
Yeah.
And by the time they're 10, it's old news. Who cares if that happened to dad? But if they'd find out when they're 10, they're like, oh my God, dad's a horrible person. So anyway, I love the idea of having family principles and lessons you want to teach your kids. And if you're going to say, hey, here's the 5 or 10 things I really hope they learn, then you got to live by it and do it. I say one of your, like a pre-question, it's like, what's my big goal of life? As I figure out, I don't know how much time we have left, but something that I think that everybody should hear. I remember going to a dad's retreat and there's like, oh, what's your dream? And I remember this guy named Ryan. He's a pretty hardcore influencer guy. Is probably recognized on Instagram, but he said, I want to be obsolete. I want my kids to not need me. I want to prepare them so much for life that if I die tomorrow, they're fine. That they're going to go live life and crush it. And I was like, that's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool concept. But it's also like a sad one.
Yeah.
Being obsolete. And when he first said that, he's like, no, I want them to not need me. I want them to be able to survive without me. Cool. So my version that I changed that to is I want to be wanted, but not needed. Mm-hmm. Right. I want to prepare my kids to succeed in life without me. That they could succeed in life on their own, without a loan, without dad's help, without assistance. If God forbid something happened to me, they'd be fine. So I want to prepare them for life that way. But I want to be wanted. What I'd really like is they don't need me anymore, but they choose to have me around because I'm fun to hang out with, because I did good memories, because they love me, because they appreciate what's there. So that becomes one of those mantras, to be wanted but not needed. Is kind of that ultimate goal of when instead of principles, right? Like that's the bigger one. I've got 4 kids. I know that the odds are that like one of them will go to jail. One of them will probably have a drug problem. Like you don't know who. One of them will learn from my mistakes. One of them will do the exact same thing I did. Like it's all that it's just, there's some stuff you can control and some stuff you can't. The other thing that I really want, I guess when my kids get in trouble, or whatever it is, I want to be their very first call.
Yeah.
I want to be the one that they go, oh my God, I'm in so much trouble. I need to call dad. Because when I was in high school and I was in my 20s, it's like, oh my God, I'm in so much trouble. I hope my dad doesn't find out. Mm-hmm. And even though he proved me time and time again that he was going to help me more than anyone else. So like, he should have been my first call because he was the most experienced, the most capable, and the most loving to be able to help me with whatever I was going through. But instead I was terrified to tell them for whatever reason. So that was a difference in parenting that he did compared to what I do. So we tried to be super honest with them about my stuff. When they're super honest with me about stuff, I try to tell them like my daughter went to this giant party. And she didn't really know it was going to be a party. And it became this giant party, and the stuff that she told us afterward, she told us because she knew hey, if she tells us, she's not gonna get in trouble. Yeah. And we were like, oh my God. And we said, well, you can't go back there. And she was a little bit mad. She goes, well, I was honest with you. You told me. You're like, no, you're not in trouble at all. Yeah. Right? The fact that you guys were there for 3 days without parents, wow. No idea. Sorry that we didn't protect you from that. The fact that you were honest with us means you're not in trouble, but you don't get to go back. And then a few days later, it started coming out these other parents, so we would have found out anyway. Mm-hmm. But she got to see that because she told us it was no big deal. Well, all these other kids were getting in so much trouble because their parents were finding out after the fact about crazy stuff. So yeah, I want to be wanted and not needed. And I want to be their first call when they're in trouble. So in order to do that, they need to never see me as a judgmental father figure.
Yeah, my dad was the one that always said that he wanted if you ever want to have a drink of alcohol, you call me, and that type of stuff. And it was there is no way I'm calling dad about any of it, and I'm not sure what he could have said or done to make that different for me. I guess probably, he worked a lot. He was gone all the time. So I don't think I ever had the chance to really make that connection that I felt comfortable being able to make that phone call. So I appreciate where you're going with that. What I usually have been saying is my kids are like my little businesses. I'm the CEO of that business right now. And my job is to get to the point where by the time they're 18, I can be on the board of advisors and that's it. Like when you need something, you give me a call. I'm always here to help with any situation you have, but I'm on a board of advisors. You're running your own show now. Like you don't need a CEO. You got it. And I'm hoping that is how we build this out, and we'll see. I mean, time will tell, right? The kids are still young. I've got a 7-month-old, so we'll see how all that goes. But what is one thing? I'm going to ask maybe two more questions. We'll wrap this up and get you out of here. But what is one thing that you are absolutely crushing as a dad right now, and what is one thing that you really need to work on right now as a dad?
Oh, I think that I'm crushing the fact that my kids will tell me anything, and I'm super loving and super supportive of the things that they love. Right? My daughter had a rowing thing in Waco a couple weeks ago. She told me, "You don't have to come," because I had to drop her off at the bus at 6 a.m. It's like a 2-hour drive away. They're going to row for 12 minutes and then 2-hour drive back. And I dropped her off at the bus, and then I drove up there, and I got to see her row by for about 15 seconds. Right. And that was it. And she's like, "Dad, you don't have to come." And I could see when she was out there how hard she was pushing. It was the farthest she'd ever gone. And I went over, like, as they came up out of the water, and she came up and she just gave me a giant hug, and she started to get a little, she got a little teary eyed. She goes, "That was the toughest thing I've ever done, Dad." And I was like, just held her. She was also proud, but it was hard. Like she was like, just hard. She'd like given it everything she had for the first time ever. Yeah. And then as we're walking around introducing me to her friends, she had her arm under mine. Like she was just glad I was there. And she said, "Don't show up." And I show up. And I did, essentially 4 hours of driving that day to see her for 10 seconds and see her for 10 minutes. And she couldn't have been happier, even though she was telling me not to show up. So that's something I'm doing a really, really good job at. I think something that I need to do better at, or something I've done a really good job at before, is these one-on-one experiences with all of the kids with very little phones, like customize the stuff that they want. Because as they get old, like when they're 3 and 4 and you're doing it, it's awesome. And the stuff that they tell you is awesome. And when they're 10 and 11 doing it, and like the conversations just change. And in the last year, which has been pretty rough on real estate, it's been pretty rough on my net worth, and pretty rough on a lot of things, right? I'm down a lot, plus Maddie getting sick. So we had a lot of struggles, right? And so during that time, one of the things that fell to the wayside was like the one-on-one dates, we'll call them. Like the once a month, taking the girls out, making sure. So that's something that I want to get back to. I took Charlotte to a basketball game a couple weeks ago. I'll take one to a game this week. Like I'll start as I'm starting to get back into it, but that's something that they need more of for sure of me. Yeah.
That's something that I put in the calendar a while ago. There was another Good Abundance guy and I, we both said we're going to do it. And then both of us fell off the wagon, and I didn't it's got to be it's an important thing. Our kids need to know individually that they're cared for, not just while they're, around mom as well, or, around the other kids. It's very important. But yeah. All right, Aaron, I greatly appreciate you jumping on. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you for a while and getting to know you a little bit more. I've heard a lot of your story, but it's always fun to kind of dig through a little bit from a different angle than we're used to coming at these questions and hearing some things. So I look forward to the next time we get to defend. Defend that
the
trophy. That you guys sent out. Yep. Look forward to defending that whenever that happens again. Are you going to Vermont, by the way?
I'll be in Vermont. I won't miss Vermont. We won't be golfing during that one, but we'll be skiing.
We won't.
No, it was a very fun way for us to meet. And thanks for the questions today, man. These are conversations and things that don't get asked on the podcast. I haven't had these conversations before on all of it. So it's fun to be able to share something new and get a chance to hear more of your story too. There's no perfect way to do any of this, but if we keep trying, maybe we'll continue to get better.
Yep, that's the goal, is try to get better all the time. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you or learn more about your businesses?
Best way is on Instagram. So it's at Aaron Amuchastegui. So it's AARONAMU. And if you get that far, that should be enough. That would be the best way to find me for sure.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Aaron, for jumping on. It was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to having a conversation in person the next time.
All right, Adam, thanks for having me.
Thank you. See everybody on the next show.